1,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
So when you look out there and you see all that green, what do you think?
I see money leaving America.
Pure insanity.
You're noticing mis and disinformation on your own social media.
This is the world we're taking in, and we can make impacts and try to improve it.
Is this a battle of rich versus poor?
In part it is.
Black versus white?
In part it is.
If you're not willing to protect a place like this, then what are you willing to protect?
Go to me, go to 3, 1, 2, 3,
go! Wow. I want a strong America. I want a proud America.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Typically at this hour and from this desk, we report on and analyze politics. We rarely step aside for weather. Hurricane Milton is not weather. It is a serious, serious storm. It is currently barreling across the Gulf of Mexico. If you look on the screen, that's where it is right now. Milton is sent to hit central Florida. We don't know precisely where in just a few hours. Florida already feeling the effects of this storm's outer bands. Massive rain, wind, all of this hitting Florida's western coast. Among the things officials are afraid of, in addition to wind and rain, storm surge. We don't know how high that storm surge will be, 6 feet, 10 feet. There are suggestions it could be as much as 15 feet high. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Floridians have already fled the projected path. State and local officials, having exhausted themselves in issuing evacuation warnings, have now told those who have decided to hunker down to prepare for life-threatening conditions. As you might expect, President Biden has been briefed on the storm. We expect to hear from the president this hour on federal preparations and response. We will bring you those remarks live when they happen. In the meantime, here is what we have already heard from state, local, and federal officials.
There is high confidence that this hurricane is going to pack a major, major punch and do an awful lot of damage.
Hurricane Milton is going to be a deadly and catastrophic storm.
If you stay, if you're, for lack of a better word, dumb enough to think you can ride it out, write your name and a next of kin phone number on your arm or something with a Sharpie, so that when we come retrieve you the next day, we know who to call.
We start tonight with Jonathan Vigliotti, who joins us from Tampa, Florida. Jonathan, I can barely see you. I hope you're doing all right. Catch us up on what you are experiencing there in Tampa.
Yeah, good evening to you, Major. We were actually reporting earlier from the Bay Area, but had to retreat from that water because of flash flooding. You could see the rain, this band really whipping here. High winds, already 4 inches of rain have fallen. And we're expecting upwards of 18 inches. You can see as they're wiping off our lens. That's going to probably be happening throughout this report. The rain coming down, going to pick up significantly. We're still hours away from landfall. The time to evacuate has expired. Those that have chosen to stay put are now going to be riding out a storm that the mayor here in Tampa has described as unsurvivable. There are a number of threats. The first one, obviously, storm surge. In some areas, we're being told here in the Tampa Bay area as much as 12 to 15 feet, as you mentioned. Then, of course, the hurricane force winds and the flash flooding that we have already experienced. It's going to be a very difficult process. I think one of the biggest concerns from what we have seen here is just all the debris from Hurricane Helene 2 weeks ago. This was a community that was literally cleaning up from that storm when it had to put everything down to evacuate. So now you've got all this high wind. It doesn't take a lot of it to push all of that debris, making it deadly projectiles. You have thousands of first responders that have come here to the region. You have more than 24 search and rescue teams that are staged here in Tampa. They're going to be sheltering in place through this hurricane, meaning if there is an emergency call, they will not be able to respond until after Hurricane Milton passes. Then you have also the response to power. We're being told 50,000 line crews are being brought here to the state from as far west as California. Officials are warning that the power could be out in some places for several weeks before that power is turned back on, Major.
And Jonathan, are there places there for people to stay, meaning shelters or some kind of place other than their residence if they so seek that?
And that's a great point, and that is one that Governor DeSantis in a press conference earlier today, when there was still time to evacuate to higher ground, made. Because now it is too dangerous to go to great distances to escape this storm. But there are shelters set up throughout the Tampa area that residents can access. If you are living in a low-lying area here along the coast, if you have a one-story home especially, you need to evacuate. You can still do so safely in short distances. You're not going to want to wait until 2 hours from now when the brunt of Milton really starts to bear down.
And we can see some minor vehicular traffic behind you, Jonathan. As always, stay safe, you and your crew. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated, Jonathan Vigliotti in Tampa. CBS News meteorologist David Yeomans joins us now. David, you've been guiding our audience all day expertly through the storm. Catch us up on what you're seeing and what you believe we should anticipate in the next couple of hours.
Well, Major, the eye of Hurricane Milton is now just 45 miles off of the barrier islands near Sarasota and slightly farther away than that from Tampa Bay. The storm is still moving northeastward toward Tampa Bay and Sarasota. The National Hurricane Center projecting a pretty sharp eastward turn here shortly, but however you cut it, Tampa Bay will get a direct hit or a more or less direct hit. Areas just south of Tampa Bay like Sarasota down to Fort Myers look to bear the brunt of the wind and the storm surge.
Everything's out.
No, I'm done. I don't hear it either.
Everything is out.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
Of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America. Weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush. What do you think is driving the spike in popularity? I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Continuing our coverage of Hurricane Milton, I want to welcome back CBS News meteorologist David Yeomans. For those of you who have been paying close attention, we had some technical difficulties. David, don't take them personally. We just lost contact with you. Please catch us up on not only what you see in terms of the storm track, but the kind of things likely to play out in the next couple, 3 hours.
No problem, Major. Yeah, the storm's eye, if you missed this earlier, is just 45 miles off the coast of Sarasota, piling water over the barrier islands. Storm surge flooding now penetrating far inland as well. The storm is still moving northeastward directly toward Tampa Bay. It is expected to take a bit of a right turn shortly, which would put the most likely landfall location right over Sarasota, Florida. That's most likely this evening Eastern time between 8 p.m. and midnight tonight. In those areas, conditions will deteriorate rapidly as the core of the eye wall around the clear eye in the center of the storm approaches. Winds in these coastal communities will easily gust over 110 miles per hour.
From your vantage point, understanding these storms, David, what's the most dangerous component part, not only as it makes landfall, but as it moves across the state?
Well, it's actually not wind in these storms, Major, that's the major killer. It is water. Both storm surge flooding in coastal communities, the rise of the ocean that overtakes people's first or second floors of their homes, but also freshwater flooding. This storm is fast moving, so we're going to have hurricane force winds across the Florida peninsula from Tampa to Orlando all the way to the East Coast and Daytona Beach. Also in these inland areas, up to 1.5 feet of rain is possible, leading to another rare high risk of flash flooding diagnosed by the National Weather Service. Unfortunately, these high risk days only come around about once a month, but they lead to more than 1/3 of all flood-related fatalities. This is the same risk that we saw, Major, just 2 weeks ago in North Carolina from Hurricane Helene.
And David, very quickly, there have been reports today of lots of tornadoes spinning off even as the storm approaches. How big a risk is that?
Tornadoes are a huge risk, and of course you don't have as much warning with a tornado as you do with this hurricane, which we've seen coming for several days. Most of the Florida peninsula, at least from Tampa and Orlando southward, is under a tornado watch through the night tonight. Hurricanes produce tornadoes frequently as they make landfall due to the pre-existing spin that's already in the atmosphere. So far, as of a few minutes ago, Major, we've had 14 reported tornadoes, and that count is increasing by the minute.
David Yeomans, thank you very much. Scott McFarland joins us now from the White House. Scott, summarize what you've heard today and the federal preparation and response.
Major, it is unique and noteworthy how much time and energy was spent in the administration at the White House today simply pushing back on the misinformation and the toxic wave of conspiracy theories that have circulated around Hurricane Helene and forthcoming Hurricane Milton. It was the president himself, it was the White House press secretary, the FEMA administrator, all taking time today to try to push back on these theories that, first of all, that the government controls the weather, that FEMA is somehow an operation trying to seize land in hurricane zones, and all the other things that go into this conspiracy theory that the government rerouted disaster money to help undocumented migrants. All of that provably false, but all of that was part of the White House's day today. Haven't seen that before as an administration has to prep for a hurricane. Take a listen to just some of it from earlier today.
There's been a reckless, irresponsible, and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies that are disturbing people. It's undermining confidence in the incredible rescue and recovery work that has already been taken and will continue to be taken. And it's harmful to those who need help the most,
It's intentional to create distrust, and that level of distrust is, as the president said earlier today, un-American. And what we need to do is make sure people can get the assistance that they need and they deserve.
On that projection screen coming from North Carolina was the FEMA administrator. There are any number of consequences, Major, to this type of disinformation during a national emergency, but I think the primary one, echoed by members of the White House team today, is that they don't want this to get in the way of people evacuating. They want people to have faith and trust in what the government is saying about the danger of Milton and to get out of there.
And also, it's worth noting at this present time, Scott, unless you're on the eastern part of Florida, the time to evacuate on the western part of Florida has passed. You need to hunker down and stay where you are, as David Yeomans just summarized and Jonathan Vigliotti shared with us just a moment ago. As for the preparations, how did the White House describe what it's put in place?
Yeah, they count things, in gallons and liters and in boxes and cartons, all the water they've gotten ready, all the emergency supplies they've gotten ready. But also they're doing this with a dual mission, obviously. They also have to continue their efforts to help Helene in western North Carolina, getting supplies there. All of this also is happening in the backdrop of a funding need for FEMA. They insist they have enough money to get through these two hurricanes, but that they are in one of those precarious positions until Congress appropriates more money, where they may be at risk of having to pause some of the longer-term projects they have underway elsewhere in the country. That tends to happen at the end of fiscal years in Septembers and Octobers, but this is going to be a paramount issue, getting them more money when Congress returns here in mid-November.
Part of the to-do list after the election. Scott MacFarlane at the White House, thank you very much. Nearly 2,000 Florida gas stations say they have already run out of fuel. Hurricane Milton could make things more complicated in the hours and days ahead, and that's putting it mildly. Here to discuss that and other topics related to Milton and energy, U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm. Madam Secretary, great to see you as always. Talk to my audience about the fuel in Florida and what can or will be done to make sure people have it if they need it.
Yeah, the current situation is that there is enough fuel, but it's more sporadic because there has been a run on gas stations, understandably, and people who are trying to top off and get out of town. Now that we're in a situation where you have to shelter in place, access to fuel in the immediate won't be as much of an issue. The governor has been moving fuel, and fuel had been coming in through the ports. The ports now have been closed, but once the storm is passed, obviously the damage has to be assessed at the ports, but that form of entry will continue, as well as the trucks, assuming that the lanes remain open. So the fuel situation right now is not as much as urgent as it was, I will say, 12 hours ago when people were all trying to get out. I will say also that there has been an effort to make it easy for people who don't have access to fuel to be able to get to shelters. There's been an effort to use Uber. The state has created free Uber access if people are in their homes and still need to get to a shelter. And the final thing, I just want to underscore one of the things that one of your previous guests just said, which is, even though it's too late to evacuate the state, but there is yet just maybe an hour while people can get to close by shelters, and people can get into those shelters, and often they're just like 10 miles, 20 miles away, just out of the eye of the storm. So we're still encouraging people who may still be hanging on to get to those shelters if they haven't already, but the fuel issue should be less of an issue.
And Madam Secretary, what can you tell us about power companies, how they're pre-positioned? Yeah. Who's coming to be there, and what will be done after the storm has passed to get the power back on?
Garrett, this is an amazing part of the American story, which is that there is a mutual assistance, a mutual aid compact among utilities across the country. There are, right now, the latest number I have is 40 states have contributed. 40 utilities in 40 states are contributing personnel to go to Florida and pre-position themselves, and Canada as well is sending personnel from the utilities to be able to help restore once the storm is through. They are pre-positioned right now, either in or around Florida, waiting for the worst to go through so that they can get in there and quickly restore. And one other thing that people need to know, Florida really is very good at this. We expect there'll be millions of people without power, but Florida and Florida utilities have really done an amazing job at trying to harden their grid. So almost half of their distribution lines, for example, their grid lines, are underground right now. And that is a good way to make sure that they're not obviously whipped around in high winds. And that's an aspect of hardening that's very important. So hopefully with all of the prep work that has taken for decades, they've been undergrounding, that it will be less than it otherwise would have been, the impacts. But it will still be, believe me, millions of people will be without power. And there are tens of thousands of people who are waiting to help.
Madam Secretary, tell my audience what's happening with power in North Carolina and Georgia, because they are still suffering, still reeling from the effects of Helene. Milton is front and center in Florida, but there are still folks who need power and other assistance in North Carolina and Georgia.
That's correct. Even as we're pre-positioning for Milton, we still have thousands of people who are assisting in the recovery efforts in the Carolinas and in Georgia. About 97% of the power from Helene has been restored. That remaining bit is all about the most difficult to restore areas where power was completely wiped out, where there is no foundation to just put up a pole again, where you've really got to go in and rebuild. And so that effort is ongoing and will continue to go on. Note that the president has deployed about 1,500 National Guard troops to the states that are affected to really help move the heavy debris and the cutting through the trees that have come down, et cetera. They may have to, those states, there may be a necessity to rebuild substations. That takes time to be able to do that. So the hardest and the most remote communities that haven't had an experience with hurricanes before and therefore hadn't had hardened infrastructure, those are the ones that will take some time to rebuild.
Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Madam Secretary, thank you very much for your time.
You bet, Garrett. Thanks, Sue.
Hurricane Milton is expected to make landfall, as we said, in the coming hours. The storm has already started lashing Florida with tornadoes, strong winds, and rain. EarthCam is showing the conditions right now, as you can see, in Naples, Florida. We're continuing to track the latest on Milton. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
On Face the Nation, we try to have an informed conversation about the essential issues of the day. The way to learn is to listen to the answers and to ask follow-up questions. Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective. And that's why the face-to-face ones we have on Face the Nation are so important.
On America, weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
This case,
it's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Let's do it!
Let's go! Let's do this! I can see clearly now that the rain is gone. Superstar approaching, superstar approaching.
Just get your popcorn and get ready.
Come on, Julia. Oh, no. I will if you will. You go, gal.
Yeah, boy! Dollar Jill.
If you can't get into the market, it's okay. Renting is fine.
Box, oh, it's bad. Screw cap, oh, it's bad. It's not true.
We are making a wonderful lemony chicken.
Ooh, it's hot.
That's good.
I wonder what Serena's doing. I wonder how Serena is feeling.
That's a really good question. No one's asked me that yet.
You're 70 years old? 70, yeah.
I'm 21.
We'll see you 7 o'clock sharp.
When you need
your sports news all the time?
We've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
Big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
Find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
The CBS News original 60 Minutes opens its archives.
Pretty loose for a Friday night.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not my first show.
With moments you haven't heard before.
It's almost more fun that way when you have something to prove.
Listen to 60 Minutes, a second look, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Milton. Excuse me. The storm is expected to make landfall possibly around 9 p.m. Eastern, give or take. Sarasota, the most likely landfall location, although Tampa and St. Petersburg remain in some manner of jeopardy, and that's putting it mildly. It is still a Category 3 storm. That means it is packing winds of about 120 miles per hour. The impacts, varied as they are, of Hurricane Milton, well, they're already being felt on the ground. This tornado, as you can see, spotted in Pembroke Pine, Florida, near Fort Lauderdale on the state's east coast. Many, many tornadoes have already been spotted. I want to bring in Kimberly Guy, who is the co-chief operating officer for Baycare Health System. The organization has made available 2 of its properties to help with hurricane response. So, Kimberly, this is a moment where things are changing by the moment. What are you hearing? What are you preparing for?
Well, we're preparing for the worst. We're the largest healthcare provider in West Central Florida with 32,000 team members and 16 hospitals, including a pediatric and adult trauma center that we never evacuate and won't flood. So our biggest commitment is to serve this community, and we need to make sure that we have our team ready in-house to serve those that need our healthcare services.
How do you handle the logistics of that, Kimberly? Is everyone basically at those places and ready for whatever comes in the door?
They are. We actually have a storm team and a recovery team. So we have 2 shifts of team who work a 12-hour shift in-house at the beginning of the storm. We call them in, we shelter them, provide food and lodging. And then when we are safe to recover, we send in the recovery team and they replace that team so that we have uninterrupted care the entire time.
You've been through storms before. What are the most typical either injuries or necessities you meet when people come to you seeking care after a storm?
After a storm, I would say one of the most common is injuries where, you know, they've tried to cut down a tree, they've fallen off a roof, some type of trauma from those things when they try to do their own cleanup, perhaps accidents based on debris in the road. Those are pretty much the common reasons they'll come to the healthcare system.
Well, picking up on what you just mentioned, debris in the road, I don't need to tell you this particular part of Florida has debris on the streets in many neighborhoods right now because of Hurricane Helene. That debris is going to turn into one of 2 things. If there's a huge storm surge, it's just going to be part of the sea of things moving around, jeopardizing people who might find themselves momentarily trapped in the water, or before that, whipped up by the winds and turned into projectiles. Does that add to your range of potential dangers for those who might seek your assistance?
It absolutely does. You've articulated that incredibly well. I think the other important factor is our team just went through a really difficult hurricane and the impact of that. And despite that, they're incredibly resilient. They're back at the table ready to serve again. But we do hope that most of that debris got picked up, but it was a pretty short window for us and turnaround for this storm.
Oftentimes in situations like this, there is a request for blood donations. Do you have enough blood or things like that? Do you have all the basics you need for what you think is coming your way in the next, let's say, week or so?
We do. That's part of our preparation. We actually oversupply, bring in stock, making sure that we'll have access, because sometimes you don't have that information, the material access right away after the storm, again, due to debris, down lines, down trees, et cetera, and flooding. So we actually stock up so that we have the supplies that we need. And then we work with our local community providers on things like blood when we need that extra call for help.
Good luck to your team and to the work ahead. Kimberly Guy, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I did not plan on staying for this one. It scared the daylights out of me.
State and local officials warn that if you haven't evacuated, well, you're too late, particularly if you're in the western part of Florida. We are tracking the latest as the outer bands of Hurricane Milton bring wind, rain, and eventually storm surge. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to our continuing breaking news coverage of Hurricane Milton. The National Weather Service has described Milton as a historic storm. What does that mean? Well, it could be the worst to hit Tampa and neighboring areas in more than a century. Storm surges could be as high as 15 feet in some areas along the state's west coast. We're awaiting remarks about the storm from President Biden. Momentarily, we will bring those to you live when they happen. Manuel Bojarcas joins us now from Orlando. Orlando is some distance away from Tampa, but already we can tell, Manny, you are feeling some effects. What is Orlando experiencing and what is it bracing for?
And this is just from the outer bands. We've had a steady drenching of rain over the last few hours. So what does this mean? Well, that some of the flooding predictions for
Manny,
flash
let me stop
floods
you.
in the Orlando area could
forgive
be
me,
true.
Manny. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to do this. We have to prepare for the president's remarks. There will be a CBS News special report starting right now.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell, and we are coming on the air as President Biden is about to deliver remarks on what he says is looking like the storm of the century. A new track of Hurricane Milton is just coming in, and the monster storm will now make landfall earlier than expected. That is just hours from now. Milton is a powerful Category 3 storm with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Conditions are already deteriorating. The storm is targeting the Sarasota area just south of Tampa. It's a region that hasn't seen a hurricane this powerful in more than 100 years. The White House is warning it will be unlike anything residents have ever seen before. Now, at this hour, officials say it is too late to get out. If you did not evacuate, it's time to shelter in place. Let's listen now to the President of the United States.
Within a few hours, Hurricane Milton is expected to make landfall on the west coast of Florida, the western coast of Florida. Already we're seeing impacts from the storm, including significant winds and heavy rain. And there's also been frequent and widespread tornado warnings throughout the day, and they're continuing and expected to expand as Milton moves over land, including a few that have already touched down in South Florida. Currently, Milton is a Category 3 with wind speeds up to 120 miles per hour. But no one should be confused. It's still expected to be one of the most and worst destructive hurricanes to hit Florida in over a century. You know, both the heads of the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service made it very clear in conversations I've had with them earlier today. Milton still carries incredible destructiveness, can wipe out communities, can cause loss of life. Storm surge is still expected to be up to 13 feet. So I urge everyone in Hurricane Milton's path to listen to local officials and follow all the safety instructions they give. At this point, evacuation is probably difficult. So I encourage people to look for safer shelter. Sometimes moving just a few miles can mean the difference between life and death. We've already approved emergency declarations for Florida. We have thousands of federal personnel on the ground, and we've staged and are ready to go. We have 20 million meals, 40 million liters of water. At my direction, the Secretary of Defense, Austin, has pre-positioned search and rescue teams, helicopters, and high water speed vehicles as close to the storm as possible, so they're ready to conduct life-saving missions. And the administrator of FEMA will be on site tonight in Florida and in the state's Emergency Operations Center. Both Administrator Criswell and I will be in constant contact with state and local officials in the hours ahead. Once the storm hits, we're going to work with state officials to clear debris, restore power, and do it as fast as possible. The Army Corps of Engineers will pump out water and decrease flooding. We've already directed the Department of Defense to be ready to provide active duty service members to support Florida after the storm surge if Governor DeSantis requests the help, which I expect he might, just like we did in North Carolina. I have surged over 1,000 U.S. Coast Guard personnel to perform search and rescue missions and reopen the port of Tampa as soon as possible. Now, I want to reiterate a point I made clear earlier today to the folks who have been impacted by Helene. This impact, and will be now impacted by Milton. Over the last few weeks, there's been reckless and irresponsible and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies about what's going on. It's undermining confidence in the people in Florida and incredible rescue and recovery work that has been undertaken. Literally, there are thousands of fellow Americans who are putting their lives at stake and putting on the line to do the dangerous work that needs to be done now. And it's harmful to those who most need the help. Quite frankly, these lies are un-American, and there's simply no place for them. Not now, not ever. Former President Trump has led this onslaught of lies. Assertions have been made that property is being confiscated. That's simply not true. They're saying people impacted by these storms will receive $750 in cash and no more. That is simply not true either. They're saying that money needed for these crises are being diverted to migrants. What the heck are they talking about? Stop it. It's outrageous. It's just not true. Now, the claims are getting even more bizarre. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous. It's so stupid. It's got to stop. Let me close with this. As difficult as these days and weeks have been, we've seen incredible courage by so many of our fellow Americans. I want to thank all the first responders for running toward danger instead of away from it, for saving lives and making a difference. FEMA personnel risking their lives, climbing on hillsides to reach people who cut off by Helena. Army National Guard flying through the gale wind force that it's amazing what they're doing. Firefighters lifting collapsed wood and metal in an attempt to see if there are survivors, any survivors under the debris, risking their lives. Coast Guard teams rappelling from helicopters to rescue people and risking their own lives. And there are countless friends and neighbors who have sacrificed for the greater good. Volunteers leaving their own families behind to help search for someone else's family. Fellow Americans looking out for one another. That's America at its very best. That's who we are. So my final message tonight is to the people of Florida and all the impacted states. We've got your back. We've got your back. And Kamala and I will be there for as long as it takes to rescue, recover, and rebuild. May God bless you all, and may God protect those serving in the eye of this storm on behalf of our nation. Thank you.
Why do you think Trump is spreading misinformation? Why do you think President Trump has sent testing kits to President Putin during the height of the pandemic? Do you have a comment, sir? Why do you think Trump is?
About American.
Why do you think Trump is spreading misinformation?
I don't know. I simply don't know. You can speculate, but I just find it, I know I've used the phrase more than I've used it ever in my whole career, un-American. It's un-American. It's not who the hell we are. What are they talking about?
Sir, have you considered calling him and asking him to stop doing that? To stop spreading it?
Oh, come on.
Mr. President, does Governor DeSantis need to take Vice President Harris's calls?
All I can tell you is that I'm talking to Governor DeSantis. He's been very gracious. He's thanked me for all we've done. He knows what we're doing, and I think that's important.
Can you say that Florida has everything it needs for the storm? How was your call with Netanyahu today?
We didn't talk about the storm.
And there you have the President of the United States noting that Florida is already feeling the impacts of Hurricane Milton, calling this one of the most destructive hurricanes to hit in over a century. The president also coming forward and making the case that they are surging a number of federal assets to help the people of Florida. He said there are 20 million meals available. There are 40 million liters of water. That Secretary Austin at the Department of Defense, leading the Pentagon, has pre-positioned assets to help in search and rescue. The president also noting that they have surged more than 1,000 Coast Guard personnel to the area. Having covered many hurricanes, our Coast Guard does an incredible job at rescuing people. They are the very best there is in this country in terms of helping people who are in a difficult situation. And so the Coast Guard, the president says, is there. And then interestingly, the president taking a large portion of his remarks to talk about what he called the reckless and harmful promotion of disinformation, naming former President Trump, saying that the lies he is telling are un-American. He said Donald Trump has led this onslaught of lies that are simply not true. And then he said, what the hell are they talking about? And singled out Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican congresswoman from Georgia, who has just recently claimed that the government is now controlling the weather. President Biden saying that is so stupid, and then once again calling this misinformation un-American. I do want to note that we have just gotten in a new storm track and want to get the very latest on that from senior national weather correspondent Rob Marciano. He is in Bradenton, that is south of Tampa. And Rob, good to see you. Tell us what you're experiencing there and what's the very latest that we're learning about the track of this storm.
Hello, Nora. Well, it's been a difficult afternoon already. A lot of this going on, but now the wind has been blowing the rain even more sideways. The time to evacuate is over. People are being told to shelter in place with winds gusting over tropical storm force. The bridges are shut down everywhere. We've already seen flooding. Take a look at the radar. You can see the center of this is just 60 miles offshore, just 60 miles now, and it's moving at 17 miles an hour. So do the math, and we can figure out the track on that. Multiple tornado warnings, over 100 of them throughout the afternoon, and over 10 reported tornadoes across the central part of the state. Heavy rain, flooding rain on the east side of the state. Matter of fact, that's where we've seen the highest wind gusts. St. Augustine, over a half a foot of rain already, and we're just getting going with this storm. It has engulfed over 3/4 of the state. All right, let's talk about the track. With it only being 60 miles offshore, 17 miles an hour, that's 3.5 hours now. So that's like 8:30, 9 o'clock Eastern time is when we expect the center to be coming across land. Somewhere, Sarasota, Bradenton, maybe jogging north into Tampa Bay, and that's what we've been worried about. If that happens, then that storm surge becomes a Tampa Bay problem. All afternoon, it's been blowing offshore and out of the bay. If it shifts north, they've got a problem. But it looks like the bulk of the surge is going to be from Sarasota and Bradenton down to Fort Myers, Port Charlotte, where they've experienced way too many of these storms with storm surge, up to 11, 12, 13, maybe 14 feet high a surge. But Tampa down to Fort Myers will see winds that will be damaging, and that will begin in about 2 hours and last well till after midnight. The acceleration of this storm should get it offshore shortly after tomorrow morning. But much like the storms that we've seen in the past that come at this time of year in this trajectory, it's going to be a West Coast and East Coast. Not many people in the state of Florida are going to escape this one. Nora?
And Rob, in all of your experience covering so many hurricanes and storms, how would you characterize its strength?
Well, you know, it's explosion to Category 5 strength. We have only seen that a handful of times, so that's certainly alarming. Climate change certainly playing a role with that. We were forecasting it to weaken because of the shear that it's experiencing now. That happened a little bit later than we were comfortable with, quite honestly. But now that weakening is beginning to happen, and we're down to Category 3 strength. Should that drop your anxiety levels? Maybe a little bit, but it's still a major storm, and we are going to see major storm impacts and damage tomorrow morning when the sun comes up. Nora?
Rob Marciano, thank you for being there in Bradenton. Let's go now to national correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti. He is in Tampa. And Jonathan, tell me how people there are bracing for potential impact.
Yeah, good evening to you, Nora. The rain, the wind picking up already. 4 inches of rain have fallen. A lot of flash flooding here in Tampa, and we're expecting upwards of 18 inches when all is said and done. For those that have chosen not to evacuate, they're going to be riding out a storm that the mayor here in Tampa has called unsurvivable. A number of threats. Rob mentioned some of them, including storm surge, 12 feet expected around here possibly. Also extreme wind. One of the biggest concerns that we have noticed, though, the pile of debris from all of the storm damage caused by Hurricane Helene 2 weeks ago. This community in the beginning process of really starting to clean up when they had to put everything down and evacuate. The issue now with the wind coming in, it doesn't take a lot to turn all of that debris into deadly projectiles. You have thousands of first responders that are staged throughout the state, search and rescue teams here in Tampa. They're going to be sheltering in place during this hurricane, meaning if there are emergency calls, they will not be able to respond until after the storm passes. You also have 50,000 linemen that are being brought into the state from all across the country as far west as California to assist with power outages. Officials here warning it could take several weeks. Nora?
Jonathan Vigliotti noting how many are on standby to try and quickly recover from this storm. Thank you, Jonathan, for being there. Want to turn now to Scott McFarland, who is at the White House. And Scott, interesting to hear the president rebuking former President Donald Trump and other Republican elected officials for spreading, in his words, outright lies, this misinformation about the federal response. And I do think it's noteworthy, too. I want to get your take on that. I mean, everyone from Republican Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina saying they've gotten all the federal help that they've needed and asked for. You have Chuck Edwards, who represents the North Carolina district that's been hit so hard, a Republican, essentially calling all these things that are out there outrageous rumors, that they're just not true. What are you hearing from White House officials about why they feel so strongly that this misinformation is penetrating?
This is really remarkable. On the day a major hurricane is hitting the United States, the White House has devoted so much bandwidth, time, and energy to knocking down this toxic cloud of conspiracy theories and misinformation. The president addressed it twice today. The White House press secretary did. The FEMA administrator did. But in those remarks a few moments ago, it's the first time somebody said it was Donald Trump who bears responsibility for these claims. There's concern it's slowed the evacuation. It's sowing distrust with FEMA and with federal officials. And I'll note this, Nora. Chuck Edwards, who you mentioned from North Carolina, Republican from that Western Carolina area, in an open letter to constituents, knocked down some of these myths, including having to say the government does not control the weather and FEMA is not trying to seize your property when they respond to a hurricane. That those things are being said out loud has really struck people here at the White House as necessary, but also pretty sad state of affairs.
An interesting note from Scott McFarland there, who also covers Capitol Hill for us, noting that a number of Republicans are condemning hurricane misinformation that is being spread by members of their own party. Our coverage of Hurricane Milton continues. For many of you, your local news is next, followed by the CBS Evening News. We're going to have a live interview with Governor Ron DeSantis, who has been in touch with President Biden. For continuous hurricane coverage, go to CBS News 24/7 all night. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Nora O'Donnell.
Picking up now from that CBS News Special Report, I'm Major Garrett in Washington. As you just heard, President Biden delivered remarks on Hurricane Milton as it moves toward Florida. He said the storm is expected to be one of the worst and most destructive this nation has seen in decades, if not longer. The president also made clear the federal government is ready to respond to the destruction that comes from Milton, whatever it might be. He also described misinformation about Milton and Hurricane Helene, which preceded it, as, quote, un-American, specifically name-checking former President Trump. Manny Bajorquez rejoins us now from Orlando. Manny, please forgive me. I'm sorry I had to interrupt you before. Please describe what's going on in Orlando and what they're bracing for.
Yeah, no worries about the interruption. Here on the ground in Orlando, we are still awaiting the worst of the hurricane, but already getting bands of rain that are raising concerns about what is forecast to hit this area. Maybe not the storm surge that's going to hit the West Coast, but the amount of rainfall is still set to cause flash flooding here in Orlando. And also the winds could topple trees and power lines. So they're telling people to expect prolonged power outages. It's going to be a long night here for what has already been a long day as people try to do those last-minute preparations and evacuations. Already, the airport here ceased operations for commercial travel at 8 this morning. The major theme parks have closed now and likely will be closed all day tomorrow. And the dynamic you have playing out here in Orlando is that not only do you have the residents here who are hunkering down, trying to get away from flood-prone areas, you have potentially visitors who couldn't get home who are now having to find a hotel, but also evacuees from the west coast of Florida who rode out Helene the last time, got a little concerned about what this one could bring and said, we're not going to ride it out this time. So they're all in this area as well. So yes, they may avoid the storm surge, but because it's still expected to be a hurricane when it hits this area, they're not going to avoid all the impacts.
Manuel Bajorquez, thank you for that excellent summary. We really appreciate it. Hurricane Milton could now make landfall in central Florida soon as 9 p.m. Eastern, maybe 9:30. We're tracking the Category 3 storm, and we will have the latest on its movements and possible implications soon. That's next on CBS News 24/7.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
Of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America. Weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush. What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party? Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
About the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now.
That are going to be driving your decisions. What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024? Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
We are not going to put our first responders' lives in jeopardy because you made a poor choice.
That is called compound error avoidance. Welcome back to our continuing breaking news coverage of Hurricane Milton, with this message conveyed by local authorities across the area most likely to be hit by the hurricane. If you haven't evacuated, it's too late. For residents who stayed behind, well, tonight is going to be a fight for a lot of things, possibly their lives. I want to bring in Jeff Masters. He's a scientist and formerly worked with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's hurricane hunters. Jeff, it's great to have you with us. Summarize for the audience what is unique about this storm, and if they hear the terminology that it's weakening, why that this storm is still quite dangerous.
We have to remember that some of the biggest catastrophes in hurricane history were from weakening storms. Katrina was weakening as it was approaching the shore, and it caused $190 billion in damage. It was a Cat 3 at landfall, and it was formerly a Cat 5. Well, here we have another former Cat 5, going to be a Cat 3 at landfall, and the storm surge is baked in. It's going to come ashore. It's going to be 8 to 13 feet along a 80-mile stretch of very heavily populated coast. So it's going to do unprecedented damage for this part of Florida. We've never seen a storm this strong over portions of, say, Sarasota, Venice. Another thing that makes it exceptional is the tornadoes it's causing over on the east coast of Florida. The tornado outbreak going on today is just unprecedented. Over 20 tornado reports so far, logged by NOAA, and some of the damage we're seeing is just the kind of stuff you'd see in the Midwest.
And Jeff, the ground is, in many parts, already saturated. Explain to the audience how that complicates and makes things more dangerous.
When you have saturated ground, it makes trees more likely to uproot and more likely to cause power outages. Also, when the rain falls on saturated ground, it's not going to soak in there. It's going to run off into the rivers right away, cause river flooding and flash flooding as well. So this is a very dangerous flood situation. NOAA has put out their highest risk for severe flooding from this hurricane.
How worried are you about those who've decided to ride this out?
Yeah, I certainly am worried because the number one danger from a hurricane is the storm surge. That's where we see the most deaths. Back 2 years ago in Hurricane Ian, we had, dozens of deaths from the storm surge. And I worry that we may see that as well from the people who chose to ride this one out.
And for the Tampa-St. Pete area, it is, as I understand it, Jeff, sea level and densely populated, which complicates both the things you just described. There's not much of a shelf, and there's a lot of people there and a lot of property.
Yeah, it's the most vulnerable place in the entire U.S. for a storm surge, both because they got over 3.5 million people there and because it's on this funnel-shaped bay where the storm surge can go in and concentrate.
Jeff Masters, thank you very much for your expertise and your time. That does it for me today. The Daily Report with John Dickerson picks up our continuing live breaking news coverage of Hurricane Milton.